Welcome to A Safe Space with Tori. My name is Toribia Spencer, and on today's podcast, we'll be discussing a very difficult but vital issue: sexual violence against women and children. Now, this is a very uncomfortable conversation to have, but it is very necessary. Please be advised that in this episode, we'll be touching on some very sensitive content. Today, we're joined by a clinical psychologist with over 10 years of experience. She specializes in trauma-informed therapy and psychological assessment. She holds a BA in psychology and an MSc in clinical psychology. She also leads corporate workshops on mental health. Please help me welcome Mrs. Denise Jatan Johnson.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I'm going to dive right in. First of all, I want to ask you, what is the definition of sexual abuse?
Yeah, so sexual abuse is really any unwanted sexual act from one person to another. Yeah. And then it becomes even more specific when we talk about sexual abuse in children. So if we have somebody below the age of consent, any form of sexual activity between adult and child is classed as sexual abuse.
Okay.
Yeah. A lot of times people confuse sexual abuse with only the act of penetrative sex. But sexual abuse is so much more than that. It can take the form of unwanted touching, coercion into things that you may not be comfortable with, extortion, prostitution, and things like that. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to touch a little bit on those same topics. So extortion, what would that look like?
Yeah, so what it is the manipulation into sexual acts and blurring that line of consent and blurring that space of the person's own ability to say no. So coercion into sexual activity would be like, could be something as simple as, come now, you do it last week, come, let's do it again this week. Or it could be even more so by like exploitative means. If you don't, then I will, and fill in the dots however you see fit to fill in. But really, it's this taking away of the person's autonomy of their body. And if we think about abuse, it's not only defined by whether or not the victim understands that they're being abused, but it's about that imbalance of power and that taking away and that violation of the person's own autonomy.
Violation. How does that differ from prostitution?
Yeah, so prostitution. So with sexual exploitation, it's this act of using somebody else's sexuality or your own sexuality for financial, emotional, or some sort of benefit to the person, right? So sexual exploitation is that kind of coercion through financial gain. So that sexual exploitation is just that. But when we think about some of these manipulation tactics, it could be bribery, it could be by promising of gifts, of promising of attention and affection and things like that. So it's really this systematic way of trying to use sexuality for personal gain. Yeah? Sometimes it could take the form of gaslighting, so making the abused person feel like if they're somewhat complicit in whatever it is that they're in, right? So they start to think that, oh, well, I had a part to play in it. I didn't say no. I didn't run away. I didn't do some of these things. So they're made to believe that somehow they are part to blame of what would have happened if I didn't dress this way, if I didn't go out at this time, if I didn't, continue this conversation. So sometimes exploitation takes that form of like the the person being gaslit into thinking that they had a part to play in the abuse too.
Do you also feel like our culture encourages that kind of mentality?
I think our culture is so split in that we have this space of being overly accepting of sexuality and sexual displays. We see it in our carnival costume, where the costumes getting less and less by the years going on. We see it in our dancing culture and things like that. There's this normalization of sexuality, which I actually think is not a bad thing. I think that it takes away this taboo around sexuality, and it has this space of sexual freedom. Whereas on the other side, when it's not carnival time, we are a very sexually conservative culture. Anything that looks remotely deviant sexually, it has so many different negative connotations. So in a way, our culture lives in this system of duality of, is it okay or is it not okay? And I think that that's where conversations like this become so important, because it is okay for women and men persons to own their sexuality and be sexual persons, and open conversations up around understanding this idea of what counts as consent, what doesn't count as consent. Because in a lot of ways, we have persons who think that because you're putting yourself out there, it's an invitation. But you could put yourself in whatever ways you want to put yourself. But if you don't want to do some things, it still counts as inappropriate sexual touch or sexual activity. So it could be as simple as I out on the road, I enjoy in my carnival, I in my costume, and somebody come behind me and I take 2 steps forward, the universal Trinidadian woman. You take 2 steps forward, you don't want the wine, right? But they continue to pursue. And if it's a no and they continue to pursue, it don't matter what I wear and what I do and how I bend in, whatever it is going on, it's still a no. So I think that those are important lines to be able to understand and to talk freely about as well.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, moving on, I would like to touch a little bit on the grooming aspects of it. How does grooming begin? How long does it last? Is there a time period on grooming?
Now, grooming is something that is done on such an individual basis, right? So thinking about what groomers are people who have close and prolonged contact with the person that they're trying to groom, because grooming isn't just a one-day thing. It isn't a one-time thing. But what grooming is not just about the access that the person has to the individual, but it's about building that trust and building that dependency. And then the big part is building that expectation of silence about what is going to happen, right? So grooming is really about these 3 things: trust, dependency, and silence. And the timeline on that could look different depending on a whole bunch of factors. But what we know is the systematic process of making the other person, making the groomed individual, feel comfortable, feel dependent, and feel like even if I spoke about this, people won't believe me, or people might blame me, or going back into that blaming culture. So grooming, it isn't necessarily a timeline, but it's usually done by somebody who has close, intimate interaction with the persons that are being groomed, right? So sometimes that could look like coaches, it could look like teachers, it could look like aunties, uncles, parents, best friends, whomever. It could look like members of the church or members of the community. So groomers, unfortunately, are really good at blending and being really good at having other people believe that they are this wonderful, I wouldn't hurt a fly, genuine person. But it's that intent to systematically gain the trust of the other person.
I understand. How would it be for a person who is the victim of grooming, who's being groomed? What type of process do they go through to feel like, okay, well, I am in this situation, I am a victim?
Yeah,
Because
sometimes people,
it's, yeah.
yes, sorry, I'm speaking over you.
No, that's all right.
But sometimes people who are being groomed don't even know that they're being groomed. They don't even know that they're being been victim. They think that this is normal. This is what friends do together, or this is what aunties and uncles do. And it becomes normalized so much to the point that sometimes they don't even know that something is wrong. They don't even know that they are being exploited. But remember what we were saying before, that lack of awareness of being abused doesn't mean that you're not being abused, right? And sometimes with persons who have been groomed, they see different things. They see different conversations like this. They see different things. I see Netflix. They always have these documentaries about these things. Just yesterday, I was looking at one. But they're not aware that they're being abused until they start hearing what are the signs of abuse. They start hearing what counts as abuse. They start hearing from people who don't normalize some of these behaviors. And then inside, they're like, oh, this wasn't right. And sometimes it's years after they realize.
I want to pique your mind just a bit. In terms of, now again, we have this culture where an uncle could come and put his little niece on his lap and give her a kiss on her cheek and those kind of things. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't want to villainize the genuine caring aunties and uncles out there, because I think the thing to look at is how the little one reacts and how forceful are you being in making it happen. So I'm a parent myself, and one of the things that I'm always, not that I'm always on alert, but looking to see comfort levels of your little one around people. Do I have to tell them, go and give uncle a kiss, go and give auntie a kiss, and then they just kind of rock back and hold your leg and they don't want to do it? You look at your little one's reactions. Is it that they're genuinely not wanting to do it for I just don't like kisses reason? Or is it that they used to be really comfortable and okay with this particular adult, but now they're behaving a little bit differently? So for me, it's this idea of not forcing a little one to do anything that they're not comfortable with, not implying that you have to give aunties and uncles and grandparents and whoever hugs when you see them or kisses. You don't have to go and share physical space with them if you don't want to.
Yeah.
And giving them that understanding that they could choose not to do something. And then further to that, with younger children, having conversations early about what is okay and what's not okay in terms of touching. Yeah. And I have the view that we don't sugarcoat names of private spaces and things, right? We don't call it a cookie or a flower or whatever. You use the appropriate names. You say vagina, you say penis, you say breast, you say butt, or whatever it is, because we normalize the use of these words. I don't know if you're allowed to say those words on podcasts or whatever, but we normalize the use of these words so that it doesn't become a taboo conversation, so that they feel free and comfortable to come to tell you if or when something is wrong. Yeah.
Nice. So before we move into how to identify signs in somebody or a child who is going through sexual abuse, I wanted to first give me the definition. What is the definition of the Romeo clause? Because I believe that is the one that exists here in Trinidad.
Yeah. So, any sexual contact between anybody over the age of 18 and anybody under the age of 16, no. All right. So if you are legally considered an adult and you go in with anybody younger than 16, that is considered inappropriate sexual activity, right? No matter whether or not the 16-year-old says yes, no, or is completely aware with it, that is not allowed. Within our legal system, and every country has their own different rules around what we call this Romeo Clause. But what this clause was really put into place for was to protect sexual activity amongst minors. So what we see is that a 14-year-old can legally have sexual interaction with somebody as long as they're within that 2-year age gap. So similarly, so 14 to 16, 16 to 18, those are the spaces that are allowable within that Romeo Clause. Romeo Clause does not exempt consent. So you still have to have consent within that space. But because of the closeness of age, they allow for the decriminalization of underage sexual activity. I know that's a big taboo subject, especially in Trinidad. Our parents probably cringing out there saying, why are we even talking about this? It's supposed to be, what is it? Books before boys or whatever it is the saying is. So, but it's this understanding of decriminalization of sexual experimentation between minors. Yeah.
I see. So, on to like these signs. So, how could we see this in our children?
Yeah.
In everyday life, in our co-workers, how can we see the signs?
So, first sign. Well, first thing I always say, if somebody comes to you and says, I have been in an uncomfortable sexual interaction, I have been sexually abused, sexually assaulted, or I don't feel comfortable with X and so person, believe them. We live in a culture, and not just a Trinidadian culture, but a global culture, where we think it's our space to investigate whether or not this person, what they're saying is the truth or not. It's not our job. If somebody comes to us in a vulnerable space and shares their experience, we listen. We listen and we point them in the direction of help and support that they might need. Point them, the help and support they might need might mean mental health support, it might mean medical support, or it might mean legal support.
And
right?
This goes for male and females, right?
Male and female.
The men
yes.
tend to be very overlooked when it comes to sexual abuse. They aren't believed.
Yeah.
And they aren't even encouraged to make a report or to...
Exactly. And even within a man himself, as speaking, we have some males in our helping space here too. But with like a man themselves, they even start to second guess, was it abuse? Because our culture is that men are the sexual pursuers, right? How could me being a pursuer be abused, right? But a man could be sexually abused in that there could be unwanted physical touch. There could be unwanted, even when we think about sexual harassment and things like that. Women are very open in saying some things to men, and sometimes you hear it and then you think, if we were to flip the genders of these people a little bit,
exactly,
imagine how inappropriate that would be. But men are just as susceptible to the ideas of being sexually abused, sexually exploited, as women. Even the ideas that a woman can't overpower a man, but a woman can take away a man's choice of consent, right? So thinking about it in those ways is that men can be just as vulnerable, maybe a little bit less, because as women, we do have the threat of being physically overpowered. But men can be sexually abused as well. And a lot of times there's a lot of shame and questioning around being able to go and speak out about it. But I think it's important to recognize and normalize the fact that men can be victims too. Yeah.
And well, on the topic of consent, How does that work in relationships?
Yeah. So in relationships, sometimes there's this expectation that because we married, because we in a committed relationship, or because we dating, sometimes even, and I always cringe at this, sometimes I say, well, I buy her dinner, she needs to put out or whatever it is, right? That is not enough to mean that you have automatic consent, right? Even within married relationships. And I know within our religious context and our cultural context here in Trinidad, we tend to think that, well, you're married, you have to. And if you don't, then you deserve whatever come out after that, right? Whatever following are you saying no. But within relationships, you are allowed to say no. Within the act itself, you are allowed to change your mind as it happening. It might be very uncomfortable, but if the comfort and the security and whatever emotional intimacy you need to engage in sex isn't there, or something changes, you are allowed to say no. Yeah. Sometimes there's something called, oh gosh, I forget the term that all your young people is use. But even within having sex, removal of contraception and things like that, or tampering with contraception, that is a form of sexual abuse too. So thinking that even within having intimate moments, things can change, you are allowed to say no. Yeah?
Yeah. What are some ways that somebody could lend support to someone who has been a victim of sexual abuse?
So first thing, as I said just now, believing them. I don't think we went into all of the signs. I think I talked myself out of not saying what some signs of abuse are. But first sign is that the person tells you. You start seeing differences in their behaviors. If they're withdrawing, they were usually real outgoing socially and chatty and interactive, and now they shut off and reserved. Sometimes it could be the flip side of it, in that somebody who was initially very reserved and, whatnot, might be very out there and promiscuous, and this change in interest and activity.
I think that is very interesting to go into, because some people doesn't think, okay, well, you've been sexually abused and you would be timid and reserved and you wouldn't want to, but there is a flip side.
Sometimes there is that flip side of hypersexuality, in that this was taken away from me, so now I have control in how I use it and how I go about it. So hypersexuality could be a sign of abuse as well. Yeah, we see people who may be more anxious, maybe more on alert all the time. With younger kids, we see a reversal in some of their developmental milestones. Sometimes is that you were toilet trained already, but why we now wet in the bed and having some troubles with incontinence and things like that. Those could be signs of abuse as well. So always believing the person. And how can you help somebody if they come and they tell you about this? Is you listen, you don't judge, you are not the investigator here to decide whether or not what they're saying is the truth. You be there for them. Don't try to, decide whether or not, but no, you saying so and so, but I know so and so is a real nice person, so why are you saying that about them? You listen. And then understanding that in a lot of spaces, people do need some sort of support of having somebody that they can talk to. A lot of us as lay people might not have capacity to be there emotionally with somebody. It's like hearing somebody tell the same story over and over. You yourself might be like, oh gosh, talking about this again. But it's important to be there and be non-judgmental and open and just be a listening ear. And when it's too much, send them some contact numbers, let them go and seek some professional support. We have a lot of mental health practitioners out there. Find Care TT is a really lovely resource that has a lot of free to the public mental health support as well. There are private practitioners who are out there and very equipped to be able to help support. And there are NGO agencies like the Rape Crisis Society, the Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and other places too that offer mental health support. Yeah?
What about, I know sometimes we talk about supports, but to some people, especially to the younger audience, there probably isn't any. They would have that thought sometimes like nobody's gonna understand. This is too much. What would you say to those people?
I would say that you're not alone with all of this, is that there are people out there who will understand fully what you are going through. And even if they can't be in your particular shoes, there are people who are there who will listen to you. Sometimes what I see a lot of is our young people, our teenagers and our preteens and whatnot, they seek support with each other, which is wonderful that they have that safe space with each other. But we need some adult support in there as well, because understanding that your peer is only able to support you so much, but we have adults who are there in safe spaces. If you feel like if you don't have safe adults around you, I would encourage you to tell teachers or members of your religious communities, or even if you call Children's Authority. Children's Authority, they have their 24-hour hotline. I wish I could remember the hotline number now, but I'm sure that you could put it into the captions or wherever.
Yes.
There are also other child support lines like Childline and things like that, which would help connect you to safe adults who would be able to support you too. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I was unable to put in the fact that this is a very touchy topic in the beginning. That is the disclaimer that we are going to be touching on some sensitive topics today. This has really been created to form that space where we can address these topics, because there is too much of miseducation going on in Trinidad. And we really want to be able to provide that support for people out there. No matter where we are or what we're going through, just know that you're not alone. And there are resources, as Mrs. Giselle Johnson mentioned, and just use it. And we're going to be touching more on the legal aspects of things on the next episode. But thank you for coming and gracing us with your presence today.
Thank you for having me.
And for the information that we received. Thank you.
Thank you.